"You can't even handle the Giantess Apache woman mocked, and the cowboy proved her wrong. The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The small frontier town of Red Rock was quiet at first, the streets mostly empty except for a few townsfolk finishing their daily chores. The general store, a wooden building with faded green paint, stood at the corner of the main street. Its windows were dusty, and the sign creaked gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the smell of leather, herbs, and old wood mingled in the air, creating a sense of home for anyone who had grown up in towns like this one. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, dust rising beneath the hooves of a sturdy brown horse. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and a confident posture, wearing a worn leather jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. His eyes were sharp and observant, scanning the town as he approached. He was a cowboy named James McAllister, though most people simply called him Jim. He had traveled far from his previous settlement, looking to trade supplies and perhaps rest for a few days before continuing west. As he rode past the main street, townsfolk peeked out from behind their doors and windows, curious about the newcomer. Jim tied his horse to a post outside the general store and adjusted his hat, the dusty wind ruffling the edges of his coat. He pushed open the swinging doors and stepped inside, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. Shelves lined with jars, sacks, and trinkets created narrow aisles, each packed with goods essential for the settlers and travelers who came through Red Rock. Behind the counter stood a woman, middle-aged, with a friendly smile and quick hands, arranging packets of dried herbs. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled and gave a nod. "Evening, stranger. What brings you to Red Rock?" Jim smiled faintly. "Evening, just passing through. Need to trade some supplies and maybe get a bite to eat." He placed a small pouch of coins on the counter, and the woman nodded, counting them carefully. Before she could respond, the store doors opened again with a gust of wind, and the sound of heavy boots echoed through the wooden floor. Every head turned as a tall figure stepped inside. She was a woman of remarkable height and presence, easily standing a head taller than anyone else in the store. Her skin was sun-kissed, her hair dark and flowing, and her eyes sharp and confident. She carried herself with a natural grace, yet there was an unmistakable aura of strength surrounding her. She was known in the area as Running Hawk, a respected member of the Apache community nearby. Tales of her strength and skill were whispered in every town, stories of her prowess in hunting, horseback riding, and physical feats that few men could match. Today, however, she seemed to be in a mood for a little mischief. Her eyes fell on Jim, who had turned his attention back to the shelves but now felt the weight of her gaze. "You're not from around here," she said, her voice carrying across the store, confident and slightly teasing. She stepped closer, her boots making a firm, deliberate sound on the floorboards. "I can tell by the way you walk. You think you can handle Red Rock, cowboy?" Jim straightened up, looking her directly in the eye. There was a calmness in him, an unshakable patience. "I can handle myself," he replied evenly, though a hint of amusement flickered across his face. Running Hawk smiled, a knowing smirk that hinted at a challenge. "Even with me around?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I doubt that." Her words were playful, but there was an edge to them. The townsfolk, who had been observing quietly, began to murmur among themselves, sensing the tension in the air. Jim adjusted his hat again and took a step closer. "I don't like to underestimate anyone," he said, "especially someone as formidable as you." His words earned a soft chuckle from Running Hawk. She leaned casually against the counter, her arms crossed. "You'll need more than words to prove that," she said. "Strength, skill, and courage. Let's see if you're more than just talk." The tone of her voice, while teasing, carried the weight of a serious challenge. Everyone in the store seemed to lean in slightly, intrigued by this unexpected encounter. Jim could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on him. Some looked worried for him, while others were curious, eager to see if he could rise to the challenge. He knew this wasn't just about physical strength. It was about presence, composure, and quick thinking. And though he had faced many challenges in his life, this one was unusual, different from any confrontation he had encountered before. He stepped back slightly, scanning the room for anything that could help him understand her challenge. Running Hawk followed his gaze, smiling knowingly. "I see you're observing," she said. "Good, that's the first step, but don't overthink it, Cowboy. Sometimes the simplest actions speak the loudest." Jim nodded slowly. He appreciated her words. They were not just a tease but a subtle piece of advice. The tension in the room was building, the air thick with anticipation. Even the store clerk had stopped her work, watching closely as the two sized each other up. Finally, Running Hawk spoke again. "If you think you can handle this, we'll test it outside. Strength and skill aren't just for show, they're for action. Follow me if you dare." She turned toward the door, her movement fluid and commanding, and the townsfolk moved aside, clearing a path. Jim followed, careful to match her pace but not rush. Outside, the town's main street stretched under the fading sunlight, long shadows stretching across the dirt road. A few onlookers had gathered, curious about what would unfold. Horses were tied to posts nearby, and the occasional wagons creaked softly as they swayed with the evening breeze. Running Hawk stopped in the middle of the street and turned to face him fully. "All right, Cowboy," she said, her tone both serious and playful. "Let's see if you can keep up." She raised one hand slightly, not in threat but in challenge. The words hung in the air, daring, teasing, and full of expectation. Jim took a deep breath, grounding himself. He felt the weight of the moment but also a sense of excitement. This was unlike anything he had faced before. Not a fight, not a robbery, but a true test of skill and character. He squared his shoulders and met her gaze. "I can keep up," he said firmly. "I don't back down from a challenge." The townsfolk murmured again, some exchanging glances of admiration, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Few men had ever faced Running Hawk and come out standing with such composure. She studied him silently for a moment, then nodded slightly. There was respect in her eyes now, a recognition of his courage. "You're bold," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "Let's see if that boldness lasts." With that, she turned slightly and gestured toward a nearby open area. "We'll begin with a test of strength. Nothing deadly, nothing dangerous, but enough to see where you stand. Are you ready, Cowboy?" Jim nodded, his heart steady. "I'm ready." The sun dipped lower, casting long, dramatic shadows across the street as the two prepared for their first test. The onlookers moved closer, sensing the significance of this moment. What began as a casual encounter in a quiet frontier town had transformed into a spectacle of courage, skill, and mutual respect. Both the cowboy and the Apache woman knew that this was not just about winning or losing. It was about proving themselves, earning respect, and understanding that true strength came from within, not just from the body. As the first challenge approached, the townsfolk held their breath. The air was filled with anticipation, the kind that only comes when two remarkable people are about to push each other to their limits. Jim adjusted his stance, his eyes never leaving Running Hawk's. She smirked again, the playful edge in her voice returning. "Let's see if you can even handle my presence," she teased, her tone light but filled with unspoken challenge. Jim laughed softly, shaking his head. "We'll see about that," he said. And with those words, the quiet town of Red Rock became the stage for a meeting that would be talked about for years to come. A meeting between courage and strength, wit and skill, humility and pride. And so, under the warm glow of the setting sun, the cowboy and the giantess Apache woman prepared to begin a challenge that neither of them, or the town, would soon forget. The dusty street of Red Rock seemed to stretch endlessly under the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. The townsfolk had gathered in small clusters, some standing on the wooden sidewalks, others leaning against wagons and posts. Children peeked curiously from behind their parents, wide-eyed with excitement. Everyone had heard the tales of Running Hawk, the Giantess Apache woman, and now they watched with bated breath as she prepared to test the cowboy who had boldly stepped into her challenge. James McAllister, the cowboy, adjusted his hat and rolled his shoulders, feeling the tension in his muscles. He had faced many challenges in his life, from stampeding cattle to rough outlaws, but this was different. This was not about surviving danger or chasing riches. This was about skill, endurance, and perhaps most importantly, respect. He could sense that Running Hawk's challenge would not just test his physical strength but his patience, intelligence, and determination. Running Hawk stood across from him, her tall frame imposing even in the gentle afternoon light. She wore a simple tunic that allowed her to move freely, and her long, dark hair was tied back to keep it out of her face. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, watched him closely, assessing his posture, his composure, and perhaps even his spirit. The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves of nearby trees and carrying the faint scent of the open plains. Without a word, she took a step forward and gestured toward a large wooden log lying across the dirt street. It was thick, heavy, and clearly designed to test strength. "Your first challenge," she said, her voice steady, "is to lift this log and carry it to that mark over there," she added, pointing toward a line drawn in the dirt some 20 feet away. Her smirk returned, teasing but not cruel. Jim's eyes scanned the log. It was heavier than any piece of timber he had carried in recent years, but he was no stranger to physical labor. He walked toward it cautiously, bending at the knees, his hands gripping the rough wood. The townsfolk murmured in astonishment. Few men in Red Rock had the confidence, or the audacity, to attempt such a feat against Running Hawk. With a deep breath, Jim lifted the log, feeling the strain in his arms and shoulders immediately. The weight pressed against him, demanding every ounce of his strength. He steadied his breath, focusing on balance and posture. Running Hawk's eyes followed his movements, noting each shift and adjustment he made. Though she could easily lift it herself, she allowed him space, understanding that true strength often came not from brute force alone but from focus and determination. Jim moved forward slowly, the log trembling slightly in his hands. Every step was calculated, ensuring he did not lose balance. The townsfolk gasped and whispered among themselves, some fearing he might falter, others marveling at his perseverance. A few children clapped softly, their excitement bubbling over at the sight of such courage. Halfway to the mark, Jim stumbled slightly, the log threatening to slip. He froze for a moment, gathering his strength and regaining control. "You're stronger than you look," Running Hawk called out, her tone light, almost playful, though the respect in her voice was unmistakable. Jim smiled faintly but did not respond, keeping his focus on the task. With a final push, he placed the log on the ground exactly at the marked line. A cheer erupted from the townsfolk, a mix of amazement and admiration. Running Hawk nodded approvingly. "Not bad," she said. "Few men could manage that with such grace. But strength alone is not enough. Are you ready for the next test?" Jim straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm ready," he said calmly. His muscles ached, but the challenge was far from over, and he felt a strange exhilaration in facing someone so skilled. For the next test, Running Hawk gestured toward a pair of horses tied nearby. "This one is about horsemanship," she explained. "You will mount that horse and guide it through a course I have set up. Speed and control matter, but so does composure. Do not let the horse sense fear in you." She turned her head toward the course, a winding path marked with posts, barrels, and small obstacles that demanded agility and careful maneuvering. Jim approached the horse, a sturdy brown stallion with a sleek coat and intelligent eyes. He ran his hand gently along its neck, speaking softly. The horse nickered, sensing his calm and steady energy. Running Hawk had chosen a challenge that required harmony between rider and animal, not just brute skill. Jim mounted smoothly, his movements confident but careful. The townsfolk watched in silence as he guided the horse through the course. The first turn was tricky. He leaned slightly, shifting his weight to maintain balance. The horse responded perfectly, following his cues without hesitation. He adjusted speed, slowed for obstacles, and even managed to guide the horse over a small log without dismounting. Running Hawk's eyes followed every movement, occasionally nodding in acknowledgement. Halfway through the course, the horse hesitated at a narrow passage between barrels. Jim leaned close, whispering reassuring words. His patience paid off as the horse moved forward, trusting his guidance. The crowd gasped and cheered quietly, impressed by the cowboy's composure. He completed the course with precision, bringing the horse to a calm stop at the finish line. Running Hawk stepped forward, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. "You have more than strength," she said. "You have patience, observation, and respect for what you handle. That is a skill not every man possesses." The townsfolk murmured in agreement, impressed not just by the cowboy's physical feats, but also by his calm approach. For the third challenge, Running Hawk decided on something that tested balance and agility. She pointed toward a large wooden beam set a few feet above the ground. "Cross this beam without falling," she instructed. "It may seem simple, but it requires focus, courage, and steady movement. Do not rush." Jim approached the beam, his boots steady on the dusty ground. He examined its width and length carefully, calculating each step in his mind. Taking a deep breath, he placed one foot on the beam, feeling its slight wobble beneath him. He moved slowly, arms outstretched to maintain balance, eyes fixed on the other side. Halfway across, the beam creaked ominously. Jim's heart pounded, but he did not falter. He remembered Running Hawk's words about composure and patience. Slowly, steadily, he continued, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd and the teasing wind that threatened to throw him off. Finally, he reached the other side, stepping down carefully. A cheer erupted, louder this time, and even the children clapped excitedly. Running Hawk's eyes sparkled with amusement and approval. "I see determination in you," she said. "You are not merely strong, you are thoughtful and careful." "That is admirable." Jim nodded, acknowledging the praise but keeping his attention on the next task. The fourth challenge tested endurance. Running Hawk led him to a clearing nearby, where a series of heavy sacks filled with grain had been stacked. "Move these sacks from one side to the other as quickly as you can," she explained. "This is not just strength, it is stamina, strategy, and willpower. Can you handle it?" Jim rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He lifted each sack carefully, arranging them at the far side of the clearing. Sweat dripped from his brow and his arms shook with the effort, but he persisted. The townsfolk watched in awe, whispering among themselves about the cowboy's resilience. Even Running Hawk seemed impressed, noting how he paced himself, conserving energy while maintaining steady progress. After what seemed like hours but was actually only a few tense minutes, Jim completed the task. He stood panting, hands on his knees, a satisfied smile on his face. Running Hawk clapped once, a loud, crisp sound that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. "You have endurance," she said, "and more importantly, you do not give up when challenged. That is a rare quality." The final test was a mixture of all the previous ones: strength, skill, agility, and quick thinking. Running Hawk pointed toward a makeshift obstacle course she had set up, combining logs, beams, sacks, and narrow paths. "This is the ultimate challenge," she said. "It will test everything. Only those who are truly prepared will succeed." Jim stepped forward, feeling the burn in his muscles but also a growing sense of confidence. He had faced every task so far with patience, focus, and respect. He knew this one would push him further, but he was ready. Carefully, he navigated the course, lifting logs, balancing on beams, moving sacks, and keeping his focus sharp. His body ached, his heart pounded, but he did not stop. Running Hawk followed him closely, observing each move. Occasionally, she offered a small piece of advice, not out of condescension but as guidance to help him succeed. Jim listened, adapted, and pressed on. The crowd cheered louder with every completed section, witnessing a display of courage and skill unlike anything Red Rock had seen before. Finally, he reached the end, stepping down from the last obstacle with steady breath and a triumphant smile. The crowd erupted in applause, their excitement echoing through the dusty street. Running Hawk approached him, her eyes full of respect. "You have proven yourself," she said simply. "Strength, patience, endurance, skill, you have shown all of them. Few could have done what you just did." Jim nodded, exhausted but exhilarated. "Thank you," he replied. "And you have been an incredible teacher. I've learned more from you in a few hours than in many years of my own life." Running Hawk smiled warmly. "And you have shown that even a cowboy can rise to a challenge," she said. "That is worth respecting." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. The townsfolk slowly began to disperse, talking excitedly about the incredible display they had just witnessed. Jim and Running Hawk stood together, two figures of strength and courage, united not in rivalry but in mutual respect. Even as the night fell, the story of their challenge lingered in the air, a tale of courage, skill, patience, and admiration that would be remembered in Red Rock for years to come. The sun had completely set now, leaving the frontier town of Red Rock bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and the fading light of dusk. Shadows stretched long across the dirt streets, giving the town a quiet, almost mystical atmosphere. The townsfolk lingered, unwilling to leave just yet. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a contest not of violence or cruelty, but of skill, strength, patience, and determination. James McAllister, the cowboy, leaned against a wooden post, his shirt damp with sweat and his hands still slightly trembling from the exertion of the last challenge. His muscles ached, and yet he felt a strange exhilaration. Every challenge he had faced so far had tested him, pushed him, and allowed him to discover strengths he hadn't known he possessed. Running Hawk, the towering Apache woman, approached him with a calm, measured gait. Her face showed a mixture of amusement and quiet admiration. "You've done well," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening. "Most men would have given up after the first challenge. You've shown endurance, skill, and the ability to adapt. That is impressive." Jim nodded, brushing his hat back and exhaling deeply. "Thank you. You've been an excellent teacher. I've learned more from these few hours than I have in years on my own." Running Hawk smiled slightly. "Good. But now comes the part that will truly test you, not just strength, endurance, or skill, but your ability to think, to plan, and to act under pressure." Jim's curiosity was piqued. He had expected physical challenges, yes, but this was different. This was about using his mind as much as his body. "I'm ready," he said, meeting her gaze. There was a spark of challenge in her eyes, one that he recognized immediately. She gestured toward a clearing at the edge of the town, where a few scattered boulders and trees created a natural obstacle course. "Your next test," she explained, "is a combination of strategy, observation, and timing. You will need to move across this terrain and retrieve a small flag I have hidden at the far side. You cannot run blindly. You must plan, adjust, and respect the obstacles. Do you understand?" Jim nodded, examining the area carefully. The terrain was uneven, with loose stones, tree roots, and low branches that could easily trip someone who moved too hastily. He crouched low and walked slowly, visualizing the path he would take. This was a test of intelligence as much as physical ability, and he intended to meet it with patience and respect, just as he had the previous challenges. Running Hawk stepped back, giving him space. She watched intently, her eyes flicking from his movements to the natural obstacles. She had designed this challenge to be tricky, not because she wanted to humiliate him, but because she understood that true skill was revealed under pressure. Jim began his careful progress, moving from rock to rock, ducking under low branches, and pausing frequently to plan his next step. The townsfolk held their breath, captivated by the precision and focus he displayed. Each movement was deliberate, each pause measured. Unlike the earlier challenges which demanded raw strength or quick reflexes, this one required observation, adaptability, and a calm mind. Jim felt the strain in his legs and arms, but he pushed forward steadily. Halfway across the clearing, he spotted the flag tucked behind a low boulder, partially hidden by fallen leaves. He considered the easiest route to reach it, but then he noticed a small, loose stone that could cause him to slip if he stepped on it. Adjusting his plan, he carefully navigated around it, keeping his body balanced and his mind sharp. Running Hawk watched silently, impressed by his methodical approach. "Most men would rush without thinking," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "But he adapts. He observes, he respects the challenge." Jim finally reached the flag, gently lifting it and holding it high for the townsfolk to see. A cheer went up and even the children clapped excitedly. But the challenge was not over. He still had to return safely across the tricky terrain. He took a deep breath, steadying his arms and legs, and began retracing his steps. Each movement was careful, deliberate, ensuring that he did not lose balance or stumble. Running Hawk's eyes followed him closely. She saw his determination, his patience, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile of genuine approval. This was more than she had expected. Most men would have given up or rushed recklessly, but Jim was proving that strength combined with intelligence could achieve what brute force alone could not. As he stepped over the final log and ducked under the last branch, he felt a surge of relief and pride. He had completed the challenge without incident, demonstrating not just physical skill but careful thought, patience, and composure. Running Hawk stepped forward, clapping her hands lightly. "You have done well," she said. "This is what I wanted to see, not just strength, but thoughtfulness, patience, and respect for the challenge itself. You are learning what it truly means to face an opponent and a task with honor." Jim lowered the flag and smiled. "I've learned from watching you, from observing your movements and approach. It's clear that skill is more than just physical, it's in the mind, the patience, and the heart." Running Hawk nodded, a look of respect in her eyes. "Exactly," she said. "Many underestimate the power of thought and careful planning. Most rush in blindly, relying only on what they can lift, push, or pull. You understand something deeper." The townsfolk murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jim's success was not just about completing the challenge, it was about the way he approached it. He had shown respect, patience, and intelligence, qualities that earned him genuine admiration. As the night deepened, Running Hawk decided it was time for a more personal challenge, one that would reveal character as much as skill. "Your final test for tonight," she said, "is one of courage and trust. You will need to climb that hill and retrieve a small bundle I have hidden among the rocks. The path is uneven and steep, and you cannot rush. You must trust your own abilities and your judgment." Jim studied the hill. It was steep, covered in loose stones and small shrubs. He could see the shadows of the rocks stretching across the slope, creating potential hazards for anyone attempting to climb too quickly. He took a deep breath, feeling the fatigue in his muscles, but also a renewed sense of determination. This was a test not just of strength or skill, but of courage and trust in himself. He began the ascent carefully, placing each foot deliberately, feeling the ground beneath him, and testing each handhold before committing his weight. The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves and carrying the faint scent of the nearby plains. Jim's focus was absolute. He was aware of every step, every shift in balance, every potential risk. Halfway up the hill, a loose stone slipped beneath his foot, sending a jolt through his leg. He froze for a moment, heart pounding, but then adjusted his footing, redistributing his weight and continuing upward. This challenge required patience, observation, and courage, all qualities he had honed over the day's previous tests. Running Hawk watched silently from below, noting his careful movements and calm composure. She could see the determination in his eyes, the way he analyzed each step and adapted to every challenge the terrain presented. This was more than physical ability. It was wisdom, courage, and presence of mind. Finally, Jim reached the top of the hill and found the small bundle tucked between two large rocks. He lifted it carefully, feeling a sense of triumph. The townsfolk below cheered, their voices echoing in the night air. But the challenge was not complete until he descended safely. Jim took a deep breath and began the careful descent, using his hands and feet to maintain balance, testing each foothold before committing his weight. The wind blew gently, but he remained steady, moving deliberately, aware of every motion. Step by step, he made his way down, finally reaching the bottom with the bundle in hand. Running Hawk approached him, her eyes filled with admiration. "You have done more than I expected," she said. "Not only have you demonstrated skill, strength, and endurance, but you have shown courage, patience, and respect. Few men could have completed all these challenges, and fewer still with such composure." Jim smiled, exhaustion and pride mingling on his face. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," he said. "You've shown me that strength is not just about what you can lift or carry, but how you think, how you adapt, and how you respect the challenge." Running Hawk nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "And you've shown me that even someone who is an outsider can rise to the occasion," she said. "You've earned respect, not just mine, but that of everyone who watched you today." The townsfolk began to disperse slowly, chatting excitedly about the incredible display they had witnessed. Children ran to their parents, recounting every detail, while adults shook their heads in amazement. Jim and Running Hawk stood together in the quiet of the night, two figures who had met in challenge, yet found mutual respect and understanding. As the lanterns flickered and the stars began to appear in the sky, the cowboy and the Apache woman shared a moment of quiet reflection. They had tested each other, pushed each other, and learned from each other. The night was cool and calm, and for a brief moment, the town of Red Rock seemed to hold its breath, honoring the courage, skill, and respect displayed by two remarkable people. The night had settled over Red Rock, and the town was quiet except for the occasional murmur of the wind through the trees and the soft creak of wagon wheels. The lanterns flickered gently, casting long shadows on the dirt streets and the wooden buildings that lined the main road. Even at this late hour, the townsfolk had not entirely dispersed. They lingered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about the extraordinary events of the day. Everyone seemed to be waiting, as if sensing that the greatest part of the challenge between the cowboy and the Apache woman was yet to come. James McAllister, the cowboy, leaned against a fence post, his clothes still damp with sweat from the earlier challenges. His muscles ached, but his spirit was energized. Every test so far had pushed him to his limits, and he had passed with patience, intelligence, and determination. He could feel the weight of exhaustion, but more importantly, he felt a growing sense of confidence. He had learned something crucial today, that challenges were not only about strength or speed, but about awareness, respect, and clever thinking. Across the street, Running Hawk, the Giantess Apache woman, watched him with a keen eye. She had seen many men attempt to rise to her challenges, but few had done so with the combination of courage, patience, and intelligence that Jim had displayed. Her respect for him had grown steadily throughout the day, though she maintained her playful, teasing demeanor. Tonight, however, she was ready to raise the stakes. She had prepared the final challenge, one that would test everything Jim had learned: strength, endurance, skill, agility, intelligence, and composure under pressure. She approached him, her tall figure outlined by the soft lantern light. "Jim," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You have done well in every challenge so far. You have shown strength, patience, and thoughtfulness. But the final test will push you further. It will require all you have learned today and more. Are you ready?" Jim straightened, adjusting his hat and taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," he said firmly. He had faced difficulties before, stampeding cattle, harsh weather, dangerous terrain, but this challenge was different. It demanded his complete focus and the combination of every skill he had demonstrated. The thought of it made his heart race, but he did not falter. Running Hawk led him to a wide open field at the edge of town. The field was dimly lit by lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows across the grass. Scattered throughout the field were various obstacles: large logs, narrow beams, piles of rocks, and uneven ground. It was a course designed to test not only strength and agility but cleverness, timing, and endurance. At the far end, a small wooden pole held a flag, fluttering slightly in the night breeze. "This is your final challenge," Running Hawk explained. "You must navigate this course, overcoming each obstacle in turn and reach the flag at the end. But there is a twist. Some obstacles are designed to test your patience. Some will test your agility. Some will test your strength. You cannot rely on just one skill. You must use everything you have learned today." Jim studied the field carefully, his sharp eyes scanning each obstacle. He noticed the loose rocks, the beams that required careful balance, and the logs that demanded both strength and strategy to move. He could feel the strain in his muscles from earlier challenges, but he reminded himself that exhaustion was temporary, determination was permanent. He began the course slowly, moving with careful precision. His first obstacle was a narrow beam, slightly elevated from the ground. He placed one foot carefully, testing its stability, then the other. The beam wobbled slightly, but he adjusted his balance, arms outstretched, eyes focused on the path ahead. The townsfolk, standing silently in the shadows, watched in awe. Few men could have maintained such composure under pressure, and fewer still could have navigated such a precarious obstacle with such grace. Once across the beam, Jim approached a pile of heavy logs. They were stacked unevenly, and he knew he had to move them to clear a path. With a deep breath, he lifted the first log, feeling the strain in his arms and shoulders. He moved slowly, carefully placing it to create a stable path. The townsfolk murmured in amazement, watching him manage the logs with patience and precision. Running Hawk's eyes followed his movements closely, noting how he conserved energy while using strategy, not just brute force, to overcome the challenge. Next came a series of loose rocks and uneven ground. Jim paused for a moment, observing the terrain and planning his route. He had learned earlier that rushing could lead to mistakes. Step by step, he moved across the rocks, adjusting his footing carefully and keeping his balance. A small slip here or there reminded him to stay vigilant, but he did not falter. Halfway through the course, he faced a particularly tricky obstacle: a wide log lying horizontally across a small gap, too high to step over and too wide to jump. He paused, considering his options. Then he remembered Running Hawk's earlier advice about using observation and intelligence. Slowly, he climbed up onto a nearby rock, carefully balancing himself, and then leapt onto the log. The townsfolk gasped softly at the skill and courage it took to execute such a move. He crossed the log carefully, muscles tense, and finally reached stable ground on the other side. Running Hawk stepped forward, her tall figure casting a shadow over him. "You are doing well," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But the next part will test your endurance and your ability to adapt to unexpected challenges. Keep your focus." Jim nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. Ahead of him, the course became even more challenging. Rocks were scattered, logs lay at odd angles, and narrow beams required careful navigation. He could feel his muscles burning, sweat stinging his eyes, but he pressed on. Each step was deliberate, each movement measured. He moved with patience and care, applying every lesson he had learned from the earlier challenges. The townsfolk watched in complete silence, holding their breath as he progressed. Every obstacle he overcame was met with quiet admiration. Children whispered to each other, amazed by the skill and composure of the cowboy who dared to face Running Hawk's challenges. Even the adults, some of whom had seen many feats of strength in their lifetimes, were impressed by his persistence and intelligence. Finally, Jim approached the last obstacle, a large log that needed to be moved to reach the flag. The log was heavy and unwieldy, but he had faced heavier challenges earlier. He assessed the best way to lift it, remembering to use his legs and keep his back straight. With careful effort, he lifted the log and rolled it just enough to clear the path. His arms shook with exhaustion, but he smiled faintly, feeling a surge of pride and accomplishment. He moved forward, the flag now clearly in sight. The last stretch of the course was uneven ground with small rocks, but he navigated it carefully, balancing each step. Finally, he reached the wooden pole and lifted the flag high above his head. The townsfolk erupted into cheers, clapping and shouting their admiration. Even Running Hawk's face broke into a genuine smile, her eyes reflecting respect and approval. "You have done it," she said, stepping closer. "You have completed the final challenge. You have shown not only strength and skill but patience, intelligence, endurance, and courage. Few men could have done what you have accomplished tonight." Jim lowered the flag and breathed deeply, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Your challenges have taught me more than I could have imagined. I understand now that true skill is not just in the body but in the mind and heart as well." Running Hawk nodded, her gaze steady. "And you have shown me something as well," she said. "You have proven that even someone from outside my community, someone who I did not know at first, can rise to a challenge with respect, intelligence, and courage. That is rare and admirable." The townsfolk continued to cheer and clap, celebrating not just the cowboy's success, but the display of respect, skill, and courage between two remarkable individuals. The night air was filled with excitement and admiration, a sense of wonder lingering over the quiet streets of Red Rock. Jim and Running Hawk stood together for a moment, the lantern light casting a soft glow around them. Both were tired, both had been pushed to their limits, and yet both were filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had tested each other, challenged each other, and in doing so, had earned mutual respect. "Tonight will be remembered," Running Hawk said softly, "not just for the challenge itself, but for the spirit in which it was faced. Strength, skill, patience, and courage, those are the true measures of a person." Jim smiled, exhaustion giving way to satisfaction. "I will remember it," he said, "and I will carry the lessons I have learned here with me, wherever I go." As the lanterns flickered and the town began to settle for the night, the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman spread quietly among the townsfolk. It was a story of courage, skill, patience, and mutual respect, a story that would be told for years to come. Jim had proven himself, not just in strength or skill, but in heart and mind. And Running Hawk had acknowledged that true strength often comes from qualities beyond the physical, from respect, patience, and intelligence. The night in Red Rock was calm and serene, but the memory of the challenges and the remarkable display of skill and courage lingered in the air. Both Jim and Running Hawk had proven something important, not just to each other, but to everyone who had witnessed their feats. They had demonstrated that true strength is a combination of many qualities, and that respect and understanding are as important as any physical ability. As the townsfolk returned to their homes, talking quietly about what they had seen, Jim and Running Hawk shared a moment of quiet reflection. They had faced a series of extraordinary challenges and had come away with a deep respect for one another. The night was cool and clear, the stars twinkling above, and for both of them the experience would remain a defining moment in their lives, a story of courage, skill, respect, and understanding that would never be forgotten. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting soft golden rays across the small frontier town of Red Rock. The town had returned to a sense of calm, the excitement of the previous day now transformed into quiet reflection. Yet, for those who had witnessed it, the story of the cowboy and the giantess Apache woman lingered like a vivid memory that could not be forgotten. People still spoke in hushed tones about the extraordinary challenges, the skill, and the courage displayed. The story had quickly become the talk of the town, a tale of bravery, patience, and respect that would be told for generations. James McAllister, the cowboy, stood near the edge of town, watching the sun rise over the distant hills. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of dew on the grass and the faint aroma of wood smoke from chimneys. He felt the lingering ache in his muscles, a reminder of the tests he had faced the previous evening. But that ache was accompanied by a sense of pride and accomplishment unlike any he had experienced before. He had proven not just his strength but his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to adapt under pressure. Across the street, Running Hawk approached him, her tall figure moving with graceful confidence. Her expression was calm but carried the unmistakable warmth of genuine respect. The challenges had tested both of them in different ways, and though the physical exertion was significant, it was the shared understanding and acknowledgement of skill that created a unique bond. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying in the quiet street. "I trust you slept well." Jim smiled, tipping his hat slightly. "Morning," he replied. "I did. My body aches, but my mind feels sharper than ever. Yesterday was extraordinary." Running Hawk nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. "It was more than a test of skill, wasn't it?" she said. "It was a lesson in patience, observation, and respect. That is what I wanted you to understand." Jim adjusted his jacket, feeling the sun warm his back. "I understand now," he said. "Strength alone is nothing without focus, awareness, and the courage to face a challenge properly. I have learned a lot from you, from the challenges, and from myself." They stood together in silence for a few moments, watching the town awaken. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, children ran to fetch water or deliver messages, and the soft sounds of morning filled the air. Yet, the previous day's events had left a mark that could not be erased. Red Rock had witnessed something extraordinary, a meeting of courage, skill, and mutual respect that went beyond mere competition. Running Hawk broke the silence. "You have proven yourself, Jim. Not because of brute strength or speed, but because of the qualities that make a person truly remarkable. Patience, intelligence, courage, and respect for others. That is rare in anyone." Jim nodded thoughtfully. "And you have shown me that true skill is more than physical ability," he said. "It is in how you approach challenges, how you respect those you face, and how you adapt to what comes your way. I will carry these lessons with me forever." The townsfolk began to notice them standing together and approached slowly, offering nods, smiles, and words of congratulations. Some had seen many feats of strength in their lifetimes, but few had witnessed such a display of courage, skill, and mutual respect. Children looked up with wide eyes, inspired by the story of the cowboy who had faced the giantess Apache woman and succeeded not just in strength but in composure and intelligence. One of the elders of the town, a man named Thomas Grady, approached Jim with a broad smile. "I've seen many men try to rise to challenges," he said, "but few have done it with the patience and cleverness you've shown. You've earned the respect of everyone here." Jim bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, sir," he said. "But much of what I have achieved is thanks to her guidance. She set the challenges, observed my every move, and taught me more than I could have imagined." He nodded toward Running Hawk, who met his gaze with a knowing smile. Running Hawk stepped forward, acknowledging the compliment with quiet dignity. "Jim faced every challenge with respect and determination," she said. "He listened, observed, adapted, and persisted. That is why he succeeded. Strength is important, but character is what makes the difference." The townsfolk murmured in agreement, some clapping softly, others nodding in respect. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman had transcended the boundaries of a simple contest. It was a story of learning, growth, and mutual respect. The challenges had been difficult, yes, but they had revealed qualities that were far more important than physical prowess. Jim looked at Running Hawk, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I want to thank you, not just for the challenges, but for showing me a different way to measure strength," he said. "I will remember this always." Running Hawk's eyes softened and she nodded. "And I want to thank you for rising to the challenge, for showing that courage and respect can be found even in someone I had never met before. You have proven that true skill is about balance, of mind, body, and heart." The townsfolk had gathered closer now, creating a small circle around the two figures. They wanted to hear every word, witness the interaction, and absorb the lessons from what had just transpired. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman had become a symbol for the entire town, a reminder that strength alone is not enough, that patience, intelligence, and respect are equally important. One of the younger men in the crowd, inspired by Jim's example, spoke up. "Sir, if I may ask," he said, looking at Jim, "how did you stay so calm through all those challenges? I would have given up long before." Jim smiled gently. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but I learned to observe, to plan, and to respect each challenge. I focused on one step at a time, and I reminded myself that giving up was not an option. Strength is important, but patience and determination are just as crucial." Running Hawk added, "And sometimes courage is quiet. It doesn't roar, it persists. It listens, watches, and adapts. That is how Jim succeeded." The young man nodded, absorbing the lesson. He, like many others, realized that the story was not about a contest between two people, but about learning, growth, and respect. The cowboy's success was not merely physical. It was a triumph of mind, spirit, and character. As the morning progressed, Jim and Running Hawk walked slowly through the town together, the townsfolk following at a respectful distance. They spoke quietly, sharing stories of past experiences, lessons learned, and the challenges they had faced in life. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, they found common ground in courage, determination, and respect. Running Hawk paused near the edge of town, looking out over the open plains. "Jim," she said softly, "I hope you understand that what we have shared here is more than a contest. It is a lesson in how to face life's challenges, with patience, observation, courage, and respect for those around you." Jim nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand," he said, "and I will carry these lessons with me, not just in Red Rock but wherever I go. You have shown me what it truly means to be strong, to be skilled, and to be honorable." Running Hawk smiled, a rare expression of warmth crossing her face. "And you have shown me that even someone outside my community can rise to the occasion. That is worth remembering." As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light across the town, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their daily routines. But the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman had left an indelible mark. People would speak of it for years to come, teaching their children about courage, skill, patience, and respect. Jim and Running Hawk remained for a few moments longer, standing side by side in quiet companionship. They had faced challenges together, tested each other, and emerged with mutual admiration. It was a rare bond, one forged not through conflict but through shared respect, effort, and understanding. Finally, Jim turned to her and said, "I should continue my journey. There are other towns, other challenges, and other lessons to learn, but I will never forget Red Rock or what I have learned here." Running Hawk nodded, her eyes reflecting both pride and respect. "And I will not forget you, Jim. You have proven that strength alone does not define a person. Character, courage, and respect are what truly matter." With a final nod, Jim mounted his horse, feeling the strength and confidence that came not just from his physical abilities, but from the lessons he had learned and the respect he had earned. Running Hawk watched him ride away, the wind lifting her hair gently, a faint smile on her face. The town of Red Rock returned to its quiet rhythm, but the memory of what had transpired lingered in every corner. The story of the cowboy and the giantess Apache woman became a legend, a tale passed down from generation to generation. It was not a story of simple victory, but of perseverance, intelligence, courage, and the respect earned through facing challenges with honor. Jim rode away with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that true strength was measured not by how much one could lift or how fast one could run, but by how one faced challenges, how one respected others, and how one applied patience, courage, and intelligence in every step of life. And Running Hawk returned to her community, carrying with her the knowledge that respect and understanding can transcend differences, that true skill is measured not only in physical prowess, but in the courage of the heart and mind. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the plains and the distant hills, the story of Red Rock and its remarkable events was sealed in memory, a story of bravery, wisdom, respect, and the enduring lessons of facing challenges with honor.